we had a bait and switch. We paid for a bunch of fiber to the home, and now we're getting 5G instead.
To the tune of several $100 billion.
Yes. We started this accounting thing not because we wanted to kill 5G, but because it was the right thing to do once we figured out how badly basic local and intrastate wireline ratepayers were getting screwed. If we are successful, 5G cannot sustain itself on an economic basis if it has to pay its own way.
We are now in court in the oral argument, and Scott is going to be presenting on January 17th. This is an amazing thing for us. We've been working together for years, and we really didn't bite the bullet to go out and do this case.
I'm confident we'll get a fair hearing from the court. The DC Circuit is demonstrated an absolute willingness to bring the commission to heel when it's appropriate to do so. And it has done so twice in just the last 6 months.
Taking certain lines of the state of the wires and moving them into private property for private use. That's where this whole thing is going. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. They've covered over the idea over the last 20 years that there was a state utility that was supposed to be upgraded properly, and that essentially we paid for that upgrade through the utility services. And now when people talk about we need a utility, well, the answer is it's already there. So from my perspective, all the cities should be going, wait a second, how much money did we spend on broadband already? Where's the fiber optic wires you promised us? This conversation hasn't really happened in most of the states. And it's funny because 5G has woken people up. You know, Scott and I have been doing this a very long time. And sometimes, you know, we'd have conversations and there'd be like one person showing up going, well, that's an exciting idea. And now you have a whole these people going, I don't want that outside my house. Yeah. Can we actually restructure things? And this case is the beginning of that restructuring, I think.
Getting folks in the local communities to start exhorting their state and local officials to educate themselves about what it is they can do. Yeah. There are many things they can still do. And all that these officials hear, though, is news coming down from the top and from the feds and from industry. There is nothing you can do. Your hands are tied. We have tied your hands. Well, your hands are not tied. I mean, there may be a piece of string around one of the fingers. Yes, you have a finger that is tied, but you've still got 9 other fingers. They may not be able to stop the tower, but they can stop the fiber that goes to the tower. There are many things that could be done at the state and local level right now. I mean, if we win, there's going to be a whole bunch more things.
I want to win. The one thing that I think most people don't understand is, okay, what does it take to win? If you look at the chessboard, what are the companies doing towards us, and what do we have to do to defend ourselves?
We've got to give them an alternative. Fiber to the home on an open, interoperable, net neutrality network, preferably one that's community owned.
Bruce Kushnick, Scott McCulloch, welcome to this this video podcast, this special conversation. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So you gentlemen are spearheading a lawsuit called the IRREGULATORS versus FCC, and this has the potential to really shift things at a foundational level. I'm going to ask you about that. But this is a vastly timely and important conversation for anyone that wants to be part of seeing 5G be redirected, you know, seeing things get back on track, so to speak, and dealing with the corruption. You guys have uncovered, as I understand it, more than $500 billion in traceable corruption that is a part of your foundation of your lawsuit. You're bringing this forward. You have court dates at the DC Circuit Court in January. Is that correct? January 2020.
January 17th, 2020, yes.
And this is a huge opening. You've already had indications of success, and you're doing some tremendously important things on behalf of, you know, everyone who wants to shift things in a better direction. So let me just ask you, let's talk about the potential of what you're doing. If the IRREGULATORS versus the FCC lawsuit is successful, what do you think is going to happen in terms of a solution and helping to redirect things here?
Scott, you want to Go first.
Sure. I can probably do it a bit more briefly. The goal is, and we think we have a good chance at obtaining the goal of requiring the FCC to recognize the fact that basic telephone ratepayers, wireline customers, have been funding deployment of wireless in general, and now 5G in particular, through their basic phone bills. This is not the only the only product of what the FCC has done, but it is a major product. If we are successful, then either the FCC will have to reconsider that and change the rules to eliminate the subsidy, or it will step aside and let individual states decide whether to do so. Should any state or the FCC decide to get rid of the massive subsidies, I don't know if it got recorded, but we're talking about at least $1 trillion nationwide over the past 15 years, some $60 billion a year perhaps. Then the result would be that local rates could go down, or the amounts of subsidy could be redeployed so many times. And the loss of the subsidy to wireless would require the wireless providers to pay far more money for the fiber that they are using, almost to the point that it would make advanced wireless in general and 5G wireless in particular uneconomic as a consumer product.
So we're talking about the potential to change everything from the foundation up, and deal with the FCC at the root of the heart of the corruption, so to speak.
It is a knife in the heart of the underlying economics that currently drive 5G.
Okay, excellent. So you're watching this, you can see the importance of what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into this conversation. I first want to thank you, gentlemen, both for being on camera today. You are doing and have been doing so much behind the scenes, but just to have this conversation in an open and candid way with so many people here is just going to be very valuable. So thank you for that. And Bruce, I appreciate specifically that you're calling on a landline and you've got a webcam hooked up there. Thank you.
That's low tech meets OA tech.
But let me just read your bios here, just so audience can really appreciate both of your gentlemen's very strong background in this area. So, Bruce, you are the executive director of New Networks, and you've been a telecom analyst for over 30 years. So if you ever have used a touch-tone phone or saw the phone number of the caller or listened to a recording over the last 3 decades, odds are Bruce has had something to do with it. In 1985, as a senior telecom analyst for IDC Link, Bruce's report predicted that the addition of new technologies and new networks would change the way America used communications. So Bruce, you've been in this for decades.
Way longer than I like.
Way longer than you like. And you've helped to establish Teletruth, and you have written a book that you've compiled the latest rendition of it. You are actually offering as a free PDF that compiles this entire saga of a story, and it's extremely valuable and powerful because it in one volume, in one epic tome, I like to call it, which you're making available for free as a download. I encourage everyone to, after you have this conversation, or maybe before, you can open up a new one and download this thing, because this is, it can serve as a foundation for anyone in any groups to really sink their teeth into this and be part of this not only the lawsuit and support it, but to really help this information to get to their own elected officials. So your book is called The Book of Broken Promises, $400 billion broadband scandal and Free the Net, released May 2015, is the third in a trilogy spanning 18 years. And I understand that 400 billion scandal is around $1 trillion now, as you mentioned. Scott, you are graduated School of Law at University of Texas in 1982, and you've, similar to Bruce, over the past decades, you've been accumulating unparalleled knowledge and experience relating to those places where technology and regulation intersect, and often collide all the way up the protocol stack. Your clients include competitive communication companies, internet service and application providers, and your focus is on public law and regulation relating to telecommunications, computers, internet privacy, procurement, electric and gas utilities, economic regulation, consulting, governmental regulations, and instruction and training to individuals, groups and companies and government agencies. So I just wanted to, before we dive into this, you know, in my film, Take Back Your Power, which was released in 2013, and it explained, and it was an expose on smart meters. One of the things that it exposed was how the ERA funds and the 2008, you know, Recovery Act allocated $11 trillion to utilities to pay for their smart meter installations. But what you guys are talking about is, sorry, $11 billion. Did I say trillion? I meant $11 billion. But what you guys are talking about is many, many times greater than that. And you have reams of evidence, and you have actual numbers and hard data and reports from the state of New York, right? So we're going to get into this and really sink our teeth into something that the conversation that has the potential to really change the entire landscape for anyone trying to stop 5G. So Bruce, I'll let you tell the story a little bit and bring us up to speed here as effectively and powerfully as you could on how we got to this point and what you guys are doing and where can we go from here?
Sure. Well, first, most people don't know that there are state utilities. A state utility is the wires of, say, for example, of AT&T California or Verizon New York, and it's the largest part of the state. And those wires were put in starting in the 1930s, the 1940s, until and America was pretty much finished with a copper wire by the 1970s. This is because the Communications Act of 1934 said everybody gets service. So rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas are all wired completely with copper wire. No matter where you went, there was a phone. That in the 1990s, and Ma Bell was one company, owned the entire United States, controlled most of the United States, controlled most of the different state utilities. And so when they broke up Ma Bell in 1984 because of monopoly practices, they created separate companies that were known as regional Bell companies, which were Bell Atlantic and Pacific Bell and NYNEX and Ameritech. These are holding companies that controlled a lot of the certain territories in certain states. But in '92, there was a thing called the Information Superhighway, where Vice President Al Gore, soon-to-be Vice President Al Gore, started campaigning on a promise to make everybody have a fiber optic wire to their home and office by 2010. And what he said, and so the companies said, we don't want the government to pay for this. We'll use ratepayer funds, but not that much, and we'll make sure that all the states are wired with fiber optics by 2010. And for example, in New Jersey, in 1993, they signed an agreement for 100% of Verizon New Jersey, which was 95% of the state, to have a fiber optic wire with 45 megabits in both directions. Cable, and that was supposed to be done in 2010. Pennsylvania was supposed to be done in 2015, with rural, urban, and suburban areas being treated equally. Now, what happened was state laws were changed, known as price caps, where they said we'll freeze one of the basic rates, but all the other rates for all the other services will be able to be whatever that we can get. So call waiting, call forwarding, they cost a penny to offer, and they charged $5 or $6 for the service. They made a lot of money, and so by the year 2000, they had not done pretty much any of the wiring at all. They had basically pocketed most of the money. I didn't understand most of this as a consultant, but I was a senior analyst and I was working in interactive services, and I got all the documents from the companies about all their financials, about how they were going to build this. And there's models that were, $1 million studies by companies like Deloitte, and they were mostly fraudulent. I mean, they were bordering on the amount of money that they said that it would cost to build the things. Just the set-top box, the box that requires on the top of the computer, would be $4,000 to $5,000. They said it was going to be $750. They said that the wiring was going to be less than $1,000 when it was going to be $5,000 to $7,000. They didn't tell the state this, and they started claiming that they were going to roll out. So like 5G, what they do is they start rolling out stuff all over the place. Oh, we're doing a thing here, we're doing a thing here. They filed with the FCC separately that they were going to do, in 22 applications, that they were going to do most of Philadelphia, most of Baltimore, most of DC, most of California. By the end of 2000, California was supposed to have 5.5 million households finished and spend $16 billion. So what happened is in 98, 99, the FCC started saying we have to track broadband, and they left out all the state commitments. They left out all the monies on the state level. There's nothing in any of the documents called the advanced network tech that they in other words, a cover up. Why? Because they hadn't done anything, and the phone companies convinced the FCC, well, we're working on it, so you really don't have to tell everybody that we didn't do the work. That scandal was basically, I tracked the numbers. So the changes in state law in 93 through the changes in 2004 came out to $200 billion in overcharging of customers. And that was done by, here's how much money they collected, here's how much money they spent, and here's the profits that they had that were different from the previous laws. Now, the thing about this case, which is we didn't know, to be quite honest, that there was a whole other scandal going on. And the scandal was really larger than the first one, which is in 2000, they said local service is paying 65% of the revenues in the year 2000, and so it should pay 65% of the expenses in each state utility. So in New York, Verizon New York is a state utility, and they basically pay the local service with 65% of the revenues. Now, the other parts of the business were a thing called special access, which are the basic guts of the network, which are all known as backhaul, and these are business data services, and these are the wires under the streets that go connecting all of the different central offices, but also the wires that the businesses use, as well as the wireless companies. Now, in 2000, they decided to change the account, keep the accounting frozen. So as you moved forward and local service was making less and less money, the expenses never changed. Example, in 2017, local service was charged $1.8 billion of corporate operations expense, 61% of the total that was charged to Verizon New York. But local service was only in 2017, local service is only 20% of the revenues, which means that it was being overcharged by $1.6 billion in just New York in just 1 year. How could they have gotten away with this? How did that percentage show up? It took us years and a bunch of other members of the regulators who are experts in the accounting rules to say, what happened was that there's an overlay. The FCC's rules are basically on top of the state utility expenses and how they are allocated. So the FCC's rules basically say local service pays this, FiOS pays this, or UVerse, the wireless company should be paying this. And these allocations, since they were frozen, all the other services got a free ride. Example, so special access, which is the guts of the network, it brought in $2 billion, but it only paid half of what local service paid in construction. How could that possibly be? Now, Verizon New York is required to file an annual report every year.
Okay, now you're talking, just to jump in, you're talking about $2 billion. You're talking about just the state of New York, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
$1.8 billion, yeah, the $1.8 billion. Now, corporate operations expense, by the way, I should just tell everybody, is the corporate jets, it is the golf tournaments, it is the lobbyists for 5G, it is the lawyers for being hired for 5G, it is all of the stuff in a garbage pail that basically is divided into the different phone companies. So in other words, we are all paying in our bills, especially local phone customers, are all paying to basically get harmed. Yeah. Because if we find that, and so that type of expenses is known as we call it cross-subsidy, where it's the monies for construction is also dumped into local service. 75%, there's a 75-25% rule, which is still on the books, which has been on the books since 1980, which says local service and the state utility pay 75% of all construction and maintenance expenses, where the other parts pay squat. Now, so we didn't know a lot about the...
Now, I just want to establish this kind of what you're talking about in New York. You have a report, right? And New York has
financial report.
Financial report for the state of New York, correct? Can you
Right.
clarify?
For Verizon New York, which is yeah.
Okay. Now, how was it that you were able to obtain that specific report? And are things different in New York with regards to like regulations and visibility than other states? And help us to frame the significance of that report in a little bit more.
Sure. Okay, so the FCC used to collect data on every state utility, and every state has a utility, up through 2007, where it said we're erasing all the laws, we're erasing all the accounting rules, they're old, we don't need them anymore. So they stopped publishing what was known as the Statistics of Common Carriers, which was published first in 1939. So from 1939 to 2007, every year we have records of how much money they were charging.
Okay.
Why they got rid of it, we believe, is because they wanted to kill off the audit trail. No other state so New York is required by law to publish this annual report. It is a very extensive report. No other state publishes anything like it that we know of. In fact, most states basically, we don't even look at these numbers anymore. These numbers don't mean anything anymore, the accounting rules. And so in California, for example, they said, oh, it's too onerous for us to see if they're cross-subsidizing the wireless and wireline networks. Now, in New York, what we know is that billions of dollars went to the wireless company. And we know this because we wrote multiple reports and started doing a lot of digging. In 2010, Verizon had basically said, we're not doing wired Fios anymore. We're taking the union guys and we're having them build out the wireless networks. Mm-hmm. And we had the union guys who did interviews with us, who told us the true story. They took members of CWA and IBEW in Massachusetts, in New York, that were doing upstate or the more rural areas for fiber, and they moved them all to wireless. But they didn't charge the wireless company for any of this. And we know this because the records that we saw basically show that the wireless company is basically dumping this into the state utility, the expense. And they're doing it as Title II, which is crazy, meaning that the wires, we hear about net neutrality and this Title II stuff, which I'll get back to, but essentially what they did was they said, oh no, this is part of the state utility, these wires, and therefore we could just charge them to local phone customers with the 75-25% rule. Now this is so nuts that when you think about it, so local service paid $1.2 billion in New York in 2017 for construction. It only spent $95 million on the network upgrades for the state. All the rest went somewhere else. It all went to wireless, as far as we can tell.
Okay, so Bruce, you've highlighted basically two scandals, right? Comprising one meta scandal that Scott, right, you mentioned is basically $1 trillion scandal that you guys have evidence and are proceeding with this as one of the main points in this lawsuit. Is that all correct so far?
Yeah, can I jump in for a second?
Please, yeah. Give us some context, Scott, in terms of like from the legal perspective now.
Well, yes, this is a legal comment, but it is also a factual one. Mm-hmm. The broadband scandal from Bruce's book and this other scandal that we are now talking about are actually related, because when they made their promises to deploy fiber, there was in fact some fiber that was put in the network. It never found its way to the home for the most part, but within the network, there was a lot of fiber that has been deployed. And of course, local ratepayers paid for it. That fiber that was put in place has now been repurposed to support wireless, and it will be used to support 5G. So we had a bait and switch. We paid for a bunch of fiber to the home, and now we're getting 5G instead.
To the tune of several $100 billion.
Yes. And on an ongoing basis, these wireless providers that have to buy the fiber that was put in place are paying very low rates for it, much lower than they would be required to pay if the costs were assigned correctly. The other point I want to make is that, we have been fortunate in that New York requires Verizon New York's information not only to be filed, but also made publicly available.
Right.
Many other states, including California, by the way, still require somewhat similar financial reports to be filed. It is simply that for the most part, they cannot be obtained pursuant to a public information request. It would be very interesting for there to be a request for this under the State Public Information Act, or using the federal nomenclature, FOIA, to see if that information could be pried from something like the Public Utilities Commission. The information is there. It's just not released to the public.
Right.
So,
Right.
Scott, do you think that this all was done kind of in advance, premeditated back 10 or more years ago, so that it could be in a covert fashion, so that 5G could basically be deployed without, you know, any pushback?
I think the original plan was for it to support unregulated internet service. But within the network, there are a whole host of similarities between the way that wireless service uses the backhaul network and the way that internet service uses the backhaul network. Mm-hmm. And so the original plan was to benefit internet. Now it has been also used to benefit wireless.
Right. So to what extent, before I go back.
I have one thing else to add. It turns out that by doing all this mathematics, it makes local service look unprofitable and all the wires look unprofitable on the books. What that means is, we don't have to build in the rural areas because we don't have any money. We can have rate increases because we're losing money. We could save on taxes because we're losing money. So New York, Verizon took a $2.6 billion loss in just 1 year, 2017, and they saved at least $850 million in tax benefits.
Wow.
Great idea to make everything look unprofitable. And so this unprofitability is the reason why we have the digital divide. It is the reason why they get away with saying we have to, the wires are being, nobody's using the wires anymore, so we can shut them off. So that we can, I just lost Scott.
Scott, I think he got disconnected, but please continue and hopefully.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. I got confused. I'm not used to looking at myself. What can I say? The bottom line to the whole thing is this unprofitability has been used as a scapegoat for everything they wanted to do in all categories. So when it comes down to reclassifying special access as private property, which is what they've been going after, meaning the wires that were the guts of the wires, they don't want to rent them anymore. They said, this competition, here's the profits. But they're not looking at the local service profits. They're just looking at a certain class of them. Or in the case of the losses of taxes, each of these in every area, they basically said, well, our companies don't have to spend as much money. Our affiliates shouldn't be, are spending less money on reimbursing us, creating losses. So they're getting the wireless company to not have to pay back to the local phone company for use of the networks what other companies would pay. And that's a lot of money. So each of these categories, there's probably 25, 30 financial buckets, we call them, where if we were to stop the cross-subsidies and we said and the government helped us, or the states or the courts, there'd be billions of dollars to go out and rewire most of the states. It'd be to rewire the cities, because all of the monies that have basically been losses aren't really losses, and the other parts of the business haven't been paying their fair share. In other words, it's literally billions of dollars in just New York a year that would be returned back to using it for construction.
So we know that it's billions of dollars in New York that the scandal is part of, and right. We know that by extrapolation, it's at minimum hundreds of billions of dollars nationwide. Right. So I wanted to ask you, Scott, to what extent do you believe the FCC is captured by industry? When did that essentially happen? Because you've been basically communications related law for decades. And what are the harms that are being caused by this situation and by the FCC and by the industry using the FCC like a pawn?
The FCC has been a captured agency almost as long as I've been either following the FCC or practicing before.
Okay.
It has been so under Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. This is not uncommon. When you have somebody who is charged with regulating an industry, they are naturally inclined at some point to view the regulated entities as their clients and feel a need to ensure their success actually ends up protecting the industry against consumers. But the FCC is one of the worst. And it actually started, the worst part of it started in the late 90s under a Democratic administration. That is when they began the process of killing off all of the independent internet service providers.
There were thousands across the country, right? And they all went.
Yeah, there were over 7,000 of them, and they're all gone now.
Yep.
The few that remain are now the wireless internet service providers that typically provide service in rural areas. That was when it really started. And, you know, just to give you another example, the FCC promulgated its order on health effects of wireless services just yesterday. And they're now under a Republican majority, but they adopted rules that had been proposed by the Democrat majority in 2013. And the two Democrat members signed on to it, even though it's a huge loss for those who have legitimate health concerns about small cell and millimeter wave wireless. This is a problem with regulatory agencies in general, and it has been particularly so with the FCC. The accounting scandals that we have identified began over a decade ago and have been kept in place and carefully structured and carefully orchestrated ever since by every administration.
Bruce, do you want to add anything to that?
We've actually, as Teletruth, one of our groups, we used to out a lot of the groups that were basically being at the FCC who were being paid for by the industry. So in 2003, we were on the FCC Consumer Advisory Committee until such time that we filed a letter because everybody in the, we had decided we have some of the experts dealing with billing issues. And so we've taken class action suits as Teletruth, and we have billing experts who work with us as part of our group, the regulators. And so we wanted to do a report, which we did on New York. We collected bills called Phone Bill Independence, which basically showed that Verizon in New York had 187 different truth in billing violations. Not only did it have truth in billing violations, but it was charging people for packages that didn't order, for lines that didn't exist, all that stuff. And some of the cases that we took, we wanted to make public because it was happening in every state. And we were on the committee, and it was our idea. And the FCC said, no, we're going to have the same hearing that you want, but we're going to have the Wireless Association, and you're not invited to speak. At which point we started checking to see who was on the committee, and we found out that there was a group called Issue Dynamics, which was a public policy affairs group in D.C., and it had put on 5 different consumer groups. One was dealing with hearing issues, one was dealing with seniors, one was dealing with low-income families, all of which were coming out of one office and were paid for by AT&T and Verizon and the other companies. We were not asked back on the committee. So we started outing all of these things. And so from my perspective, the current committees are also, I think it was the mayor of San Jose who was on one of the committees that left because he said, this is ridiculous. You know, we're not going to get anything done here. All these people here are basically parts of the industry. So I think this problem of the advisory committees being also captured and manipulated has never really, they give it lip service for more than anything else.
So there's been massive bait and switch and massive corruption, accounting corruption and financial corruption scandal behind the scenes. And because the industry has captured the FCC, there's no oversight. So nobody's cracking down on Verizon New York or any other, you know,
right,
state company that have brought us to this point of the 5G deployment without any testing and just, you know, the audience is familiar with the harms of 5G, mostly from the health perspective, but this is adding an entirely new dimension. From gentlemen, from both of your perspective and from the FCC's, you know, taking this whole story into account, what are the issues with 5G as you see it, and how does your case help to slow down or even halt 5G deployment specifically, if we can go deeper into that?
Scott?
As I mentioned earlier, we started this accounting thing not because we wanted to kill 5G, but because it was the right thing to do. Once we figured out how badly basic local and intrastate wireline ratepayers were getting screwed, they weren't getting the promised services that they were paying for, and the money that they were paying was going to something completely different. So we started to do this, just try to stop the wrongs. It has become apparent, however, that one of the major beneficiaries of it now is, of course, this 5G deployment. I do a lot of wireless work. In fact, I've actually represented and still do represent some wireless carriers. They're not doing 5G, but I represent some. And so I know a bit about the industry. And I can tell you the economics simply do not work if these guys have to pay their own way. And so that is why, if we are successful, 5G cannot sustain itself on an economic basis if it has to pay its own way. And that is not just because at some point the prices they pay will have to go up. It is because the entire capital structure that underlies them will evaporate. People who lend them money in the bond market, people who lend them money in short-term capital, stockholders will all realize that 5G is just not sustainable, and they will not be able to attract the capital that is necessary to build the network.
So your case shows that 5G is not profitable if it had to pay its way.
Yes.
You talk about wireless is cross-subsidized by wireline. You've established, how that bait and switch has happened. I mean, does your case have the leverage to really correct this, do you feel? Assuming that it's, you guys need support, this is going forward, you're doing this, but in the context of this, the corruption that's happened and obviously evident within the FCC, are you getting, and will you feel you get like a fair hearing at the DC Circuit Court? And like, can we talk about this in terms of the corruption that's been promulgated throughout the governing agencies, and does it extend through the court system, or the courts, obligated somehow to do the right thing?
Well, my experience with the DC Circuit Court is that it's never afraid of the FCC, and is more than willing to reverse and remand to the commission. It's issued several orders. I'm confident we'll get a fair hearing from the court. The DC Circuit is demonstrated an absolute willingness to bring the commission to heel when it's appropriate to do so. And it has done so twice in just the last 6 months in big cases.
Yeah.
Now, do I think the FCC will ever treat us fairly? Will there be a Perry Mason moment where they go, "Oh, you got me. I admit that I've been part of a fraud for 20 years." No. But we do hope to force them to confront for the first time the numbers that they have been running from for so long. Up to this point, they have done everything they could to hide the information. And when confronted with it, they either ignore it or deem it irrelevant. Indeed, one of our points in the case before the DC Circuit is the commission refused to consider this information we gave them, and nobody disputed. So if the case is remanded to the commission, which is one of the two tracks this could take, then they will at least be forced to confront and deal with the numbers. Mm-hmm. And perhaps they will feel some compunction to fix it at least a little going forward. And there are some reasons why they might be persuaded to do so, because of the way these rules operate on rural carriers, the smaller rural carriers. Many of them actually agree with us on what the current accounting rules do. and the impact of the changes that we have recommended. We actually agreed with many of the rural carriers, and many of the rural carriers have in fact secured FCC permission to reallocate their dollars to do what we say should be done. No, I don't think the commission is ever really going to fess up, but they may have to confront what they have done and fix it going forward. The other track, and one that I may actually prefer, is that the FCC would just give up trying to keep this away from the states. And in an outcome very similar to the net neutrality decision back in August, let the states take this issue up and do what they think is right for their jurisdiction. And I have some fair confidence that at least some states, if given the opportunity, would figure this out and would reallocate the money. And if they do that, there's only a couple of places it can go.
Good. Bruce, any additional thoughts?
Well, I think Scott nailed most of the stuff I was thinking. There's a couple of things. One of the guys on our team, his name is Paul Hartman. He's a former assistant chief of the pricing policy division of the FCC's accounting rules. He's the leading expert in the United States. It took me years to figure out what Paul was saying because he speaks in wonk, like I do, but different wonk. However, he was there. And he explained to us how all these numbers worked. He wrote a separate report in 2015 called the Hartman Memorandum, as if it was a murder mystery or a Ludlum novel, and essentially another book on how the rates were created. And we filed these things. And when you deny the leading expert in the United States any fairness about making comments about what he said and why we were wrong or right. This started in 2015. We filed 18 times. So it wasn't like we were just sitting around going, hey, we filed about New York, we filed about other states because, it's going to come up. We have data from multiple states prior to 2010, 2012, matches New York completely.
Okay.
The 2007 data matches New York completely for all states. The last time the FCC collected the data. So it isn't like we don't have a model that goes back for 20 years about how all this thing played out. So from my perspective, I think the exciting thing is our counsel, Scott, has figured out how to corner the FCC so that they will have to tell the court, hi, we either control these rules are in place and they work, or they don't. The FCC said, no, the rules are no longer in use. The rules are no longer in use. If that's okay, if they say that in the court, then we'll say, okay, fine. We're just going to take this to the states. And then we go and file in lots of states for the cross-subsidies of billions of dollars. And we get the AG to play because we'll have the numbers, and they'll have to look at them going, wait a second, here's the numbers in New York. They are identical to ours, we think. And we could, in some states, we could show, here's the last data you collected. Now, when Scott said California, if we bring the New York annual report to go, here, give us this data, they're going to be hard pushed if a lot of if the AG said we have to see this data now. Because if these cross subsidies are correct, then prices are unfair and unjust and unreasonable, that the networks were cross subsidized illegally. You can't take money from grandma and spend it on the wireless subsidy. It's just not legal.
One of the beauties of our particular case is technically what we're challenging is an FCC decision on what is known as separations, which is the distribution of costs between the state jurisdiction and the interstate jurisdiction. And
between local service and say FiOS or special access, which are interstate services, different classifications, same wires, different classification.
And a lot of people say, well, but we've had all this deregulation at the state level too. But every single one that I am aware of the state deregulation programs have an express exception for what are known as separations changes. And so if we are successful and a state decides to reallocate costs, it is required to flow those through in price changes, even to the deregulated rates. Separations changes are an externality and therefore a justification for changing the rates, notwithstanding deregulation.
Okay. Wow, there's a lot there. I mean, Scott, you mentioned a while ago that there's two potential tracks that things could go on in the regulator's lawsuit, and either of them would basically be a win-win, right? And would result in a shift of power back to the people and to the states and away from the FCC, correct?
Well, I would prefer a shift back of power to the states. I tend to be a federalistic person, believe in the 10th Amendment, and thinks that states should be able to do their own thing as much as possible. And so just from a political perspective, if a state wants to keep giving away its citizens money, I guess it could be allowed to do so. And if the citizens are mad, they can unelect their state officials. I also think that there are many states that are more inclined to fix this the right way than would the FCC.
Yeah.
If it goes back to the FCC, I'm sure that they'll go down fighting and screaming, although the numbers are pretty compelling.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about support in a minute, because there's a couple different areas that people can, as of today, right now, offer support. One is to make a contribution to the lawsuit financially, a donation. And second is to communicate this information and the information that you guys are bringing forward to their elected reps, right? To let them know, because whether it's at the local level or the state level, elected reps often don't have the full story. I mean, they're dealing with a lot of issues.
We've been doing this for a very, very, very long time. And we are shocked, and I'm astonished that we are now in court in the oral argument, and Scott is going to be presenting on January 17th. This is an amazing thing for us. We've been working together for years, and we really didn't bite the bullet to go out and do this case. Any help, and to make sure that we're in court is a very important thing. If we don't do this, thing, nobody else has the data. Nobody's going to take this fight. And part two is we're going to be calling for congressional hearings immediately, and for investigations to take this, as you would say, take the networks back. State by state, we should be sitting going, wait a second, you overcharged us this much money? We want that money back. You cross-subsidized in all these other businesses? We want the money back. And we want the money used for where it's supposed to go, not where you put it. I.e., we want it back into the fiber. We want to have competition on the networks. We want lower prices. We don't want you to take the wireless company and shut off all the other wires, which is crazy. Or what they're really doing is they're dismantling the state utility and taking certain lines of the wires and moving them into private property for private use. That's where this whole thing is going. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. So from my perspective, anybody who cares about stopping 5G, the first thing they should say is, it's not profitable. We want the money back. I need to add, 5G is a small cell antenna. It has a range of a block or two. It requires a fiber optic wire. Nobody's put the fiber optic wires in ever before. They're not going to do it now. So what this to me is, this is the information superhighway. This is the first scandal I mentioned. We're going to rewire America with fiber optics. We're going to rewire America with 5G. No, they're not. And so my take is what they'll do is they'll put 4G other places. They'll really not do 5G, but they'll put the small cells in places where it's economically feasible for them to, quote, make money. You take the wires away that they have to pay for, they can't make any of the money. So from my perspective, all the cities should be going, wait a second, how much money did we spend on broadband already? Where's the fiber optic wires you promised us? This conversation hasn't really happened in most of the states. And I think from our perspective is when we tell people that the corporate operations expenses, that the money for the lawyers for 5G are being dumped into the cost of service and rate increases, I think, some of the players should go, okay, we want to know what the rates should be. Give us the actual cost. Show us the books. Now, follow the money, or, a scenario, which is what we're really doing. We're saying, we have the books in New York. Here's what they did. We want the money back in all these states. And I think that, that call, that cry, we should work together on, because take back the networks, take back the power. They're in a similar justification. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The current situation is we have an election year. And some of the people have said, oh, no, we have to give $85 billion to go out and rewire the rural areas. And our answer is you don't have to pay a cent. Take the money back and go do the audits first, and then tell us about how much you really need. Stop giving subsidies to the companies that already ripped us off. For example, AT&T gets $500 million, I think it is, a year in the CAF, Connect America funds, which is ridiculous when they basically didn't wire what they were supposed to wire immediately. Yeah. Another example, in the mergers that created AT&T, they were supposed to have 100% of 22 states with some broadband by the year 2007. 100% was supposed to be finished. We filed with the FCC saying, excuse me, this whole area of the United States in the AT&T territories that were never given broadband. And it's in California, in Kentucky, all over the country. We were getting notifications. Those people should say, excuse me, wait a second. You had all these obligations you didn't do. You collected all this money and you pocketed it. It's time for investigations. So from our perspective, this is the start. Our case is the start of going after solving the digital divide. It also solves things like net neutrality, and I should explain why. The wires basically that have been put in as Title II on the fiber optic wires. This is an unbelievable story because most people have no clue. In the States, what they did was Verizon went to New York and said, excuse me, but these wires, we really need to have some money to pay for them, so we're going to make them as just part of the state utility upgrade. That's how they did it. And they said, as a Title II. They told the FCC within the same breath, oh, no, these are broadband, and therefore these are information services, and Title I. And so the states have never basically said, excuse me, here's the filing. It says these wires are Title II. If they're Title II, now, we did an analysis of different states and the investment that was made by state. And it doesn't match anything the FCC ever says, because the FCC is always looking at the annual reports of the companies. We're looking at the actual data by the state of New York, and we can get it for other states, of how much they actually spent on the networks. It doesn't match what they said. So net neutrality did not harm the investment at all. The wires are already Title II, and they should basically have taken this stance a long time ago, but nobody has. When we move forward on the state level, this is a big fight because the net neutrality people are going, how do we make sure net neutrality sticks? Answer, we bring in competition. These are Title II wires, they're common carrier, okay. Competition should be able to use these wires at just and reasonable rates. Very straightforward.
Let me follow up just a little bit and try to put some of that into a little bit more English. When Bruce says Title II, what he really means is public utility or common carrier. The 2015 FCC order on net neutrality subjected broadband internet to Title II. And the FCC order that was pushed through the Trump administration soon after they took power removed it from Title II. And so when Bruce says Title II and the states can bring back Title II, what he's really saying is, especially given the August decision by the DC Circuit, the states can now impose net neutrality, basically.
Right.
Now, let me take just another step here.
That's significant. That's significant, okay? Because that involves, or let me ask you this before you tell me that next step, Scott. At the state level, this really opens up things at a state level. For the most part, the battle has been at the local level, people connecting with their local governments to try to fight against the FCC. But what you guys are doing is opening things up more so, very powerfully at the state level in an unprecedented way, to basically let the state know that it has a lot more power to correct this situation. And it also has, would you say, Scott, it has the responsibility to act in the best interest of the people if it's made aware, if the state elected reps are made aware of this scandal, they have to take appropriate action, do they not? Or else do they become liable?
One would hope that the state commissions would be more responsive to their citizens than these remote people up in the DC swamp. Mm-hmm. Sorry to use a magic word that may bother some, but it is in fact a swamp. Mm-hmm. And it is bipartisan in that respect.
Yep.
The state commissions do tend to be more responsive to citizens if the citizens are active before them. Now, if the citizens aren't there, then they get captured just the same way the FCC does.
There you go.
but let me kind of go to the next end state here, because one of the things that has offended me the most about this wireless deployment in especially the small cell and 5G sham is that, we were promised fiber to the home, and now we're getting deregulated, harmful 5G that we're paying for. So the end state that we're looking for is really going back to the fiber to the home that supports an open, interoperable network, i.e. net neutrality. And perhaps if the states push hard enough, they could also begin a transition to these local networks not being owned by these large private industries, but instead are more cooperatively owned, or perhaps a municipal broadband utility.
Yeah, like Timothy Beckley talks about, local governments taking back their, communications utilities.
Well, they could actually build one, and if these fibers are not used to support wireless, then they're going to be sitting there, and a local jurisdiction could either buy the service or condemn them and take over the network and do muni broadband. So, my hope and goal is that while we are also opposing 5G, we're also getting back to the original vision of the information superhighway from the 1990s, which is an open, interoperable public utility broadband network,
right.
Which has the characteristics that people ascribe to net neutrality.
Bruce, you talk about how the word utility has been removed, or some wordsmithing has been done legally. Can you talk about that and the implications of it?
Okay, so even the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, which is the association for the advocate offices around the country, don't use the word utility anymore.
Why not?
And in talking to most of the people in not just the 5G world, but in our telecom world, people who we thought would know these things have no clue that there is a state utility in New York. None. Or in California. So if you ask people, hi, AT&T, California is a state utility, right? They go, no, it's the ISP, or it's the wireless company. So they've covered over the idea over the last 20 years that there was a state utility that was supposed to be upgraded properly, and that essentially we paid for that upgrade through the utility services. And now when people talk about we need a utility, well, the answer is it's already there. Now, I have to say something about what Scott said, because it's very important and most people don't know this. So starting in the 1990s, they started putting fiber in the ground, but then they stopped doing it, and they because they put the long wires all over the place. And they then were supposed to do, Verizon was supposed to do Fios, and then they put more wires in. So there's lots of wires all over the cities, all over the states that were never turned on, or never used. The question comes down to, well, if we condemn those wires, can the cities use them? Now, most cities don't understand that they're part of a state utility. There's a disconnect here, where the cities think they have to defend themselves. They've never really said, we have a state utility, which covers all of us. So why aren't we fighting for that? And that, I think, is where the big switch has to be, where they have to understand that the state has power, and the cities have power via the state. Now, they can get budgets to build their own areas, especially if we are correct and we prevail. But it would be important for the cities to wake up going, okay, we are a state, we're in the state utility controls this stuff. How can we use this? How can we leverage this?
So cities and states working together to dissolve the FCC stranglehold is what we're talking about, with the
exactly
backing and support of the people.
Right, and it's funny because 5G has woken people up. Scott and I have been doing this a very long time, and sometimes we'd have conversations, and there'd be like one person showing up going, "Well, that's an exciting idea," and now you have a whole these people going, "I don't want that outside my house." Yeah. And I think that the 5G stuff is basically, and they're a little late. We've been talking about this since 2009 or 10 when they were going to replace the wires with wireless. That plan was announced way back when, but now that they're here, the question is in an election year with a lot of people who really want to try to make a difference, we hope, can we actually restructure things? And this case is the beginning of that restructuring, I think.
Excellent. So, Scott, I want to get back to you. In terms of framing this opportunity here with the Irregulators versus FCC lawsuit, a question I asked you a little while ago was in the direction of, can we trust that there could potentially be a positive ruling in the court system? And you touched on one of, there has been some wins, you could say, that the people have had, and that some of which you are part of. But can you talk about the August 9th ruling in the DC Circuit Court, and how, or any other recent rulings that indicate that the courts do have a motivation and do have the gumption to go against the FCC? Talk about some of the pathways to success and some of the signs of hope that that you guys are seeing.
Well, let me try to put it this way. The DC Circuit issued 2 decisions over the summer.
Okay.
One was the net neutrality decision. The other was a United Kiwata, and I always mispronounce that name. Please, nobody take offense. It was the wireless decision on NEPA and historically significant locations, where the DC Circuit reversed and vacated an FCC order, which eliminated environmental effects reviews for wireless locations, in particular 5G.
So that essentially changed the 1996 Telecommunication Act, Section 704, which says that a local initiative cannot protest the location of an antenna on the basis of environmental or health concern. Is that correct?
It did not change the statute. It reversed an FCC decision that had exempted 5G or small cell deployments from environmental health effects and historical site review on a categorical basis.
Okay.
And the court remanded it to the commission and required them to bring that into the existing regime.
So what's the significance of that?
Well, I mean, my opinion on that is somewhat different than some of the others who are advocates in the 5G community. I don't want to oversell that decision. It is really, really important. But what it basically does is require the FCC to look again at its antics on trying to exempt 5G from any meaningful regulation. They were recently did vacate the part of the rule. And so now when somebody is planning a project, they have to, in fact, look at whether some kind of environmental or historical review is necessary on a case-by-case basis. What the FCC had done is basically say that 5G type deployments, and especially the small cell millimeter wave deployments, were not required to at all undergo any kind of environmental effects or historical impact statement. They did not have to do any analysis at all. The DC Circuit vacated that.
Okay.
And so now, before somebody proposes to make an installation, they have to make a demonstration that they are indeed compliant with the health effects and will not disturb a historically significant area.
So that ruling means that there has to be, before any 5G deployments, there has to be an environmental impact study.
No.
No.
No. There has to be an assessment whether a study is required.
Okay.
And that's where I disagree with what some of the people are saying about this. I'm not saying an environmental impact study is always necessary, but they have to see whether one is necessary.
The
Whereas
local,
before they didn't
government or the carrier, who's responsible for doing that?
The person who is deploying the site will have to make an assessment to determine whether a study or other analysis is necessary.
And that assessment has to be on the public record. It has to be publicly available, correct?
Yes, and when they make their zoning application or their site application before the local jurisdiction can now at least make sure that that check was done, whereas before they did not have that option.
Okay, is that progress, you could say, that ruling, part of your strategy, or is it something completely separate?
Well, I mean, I started out by saying we're going to have a three-legged stool here,
Yeah.
and that's leg one. It's something that did return some level of power to the local jurisdictions, which before then were pretty much completely preempted from doing anything other than taking in the piece of paper and stamping it approved. The second leg is the net neutrality decision, also by the DC Circuit, which allowed the FCC to deregulate the internet, i.e. take it out of Title II for interstate purposes, but allowed the states to impose some level of regulation on a state-by-state and case-by-case basis. So if a state wants to regulate internet service, it had opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
That's leg two. Leg three will be our case, where we get at the finances of all of this. This was the first two are regulation issues.
Yeah.
Ours is the economic case.
Okay.
And if we are successful, then states will be able to better control the extent to which wireless deployment pays its own way. And my understanding of the numbers is if they got to pay their own way, 5G is not sustainable as a product on a consumer basis.
Yeah. You know, can you share with us any, I'm not saying like show all your cards right now because I want to respect your strategy, but can you share with us anything else about your case and about, you know, some of the, Bruce, you mentioned how pleased you are that you've been doing this for so long and now you're finally getting on the stage, right? And what I think I want to do and we want to do is we if you're watching this, we all need to like get behind this as a huge opportunity, right? Like this is a big opportunity here, and that you guys are bringing this into the limelight in the short term. And secondly, I want to work with both of you gentlemen to have a specific simplified action that people can do to their elected reps. We'll do that at a later date, you know, in the forthcoming weeks.
Sure.
But can you share anything else strategically that you're very pleased about that gives us, the viewers, some hope about really creating a significant change here?
Well, I'll let Bruce weigh in on, you know, what the folks can do. Hopefully it involves sending some money just so that we can pay for my flight and lodging in order to give all our
we'll definitely, if you're watching this, part of this, we're asking you for your support, and we'll do that at the end of the call. And this is please go ahead.
Strategically, I think the good news is the FCC made a somewhat half-hearted effort to get the case thrown out. And so far we've done fairly well on keeping the case going on just a procedural basis. One of the biggest hurdles that you always have when you're challenging a federal agency decision is what's known as the concept of standing. And we think we're in a really good position on that. I think the court will get to the merits. The other thing is, if you read the briefing carefully, the FCC has already backtracked some. They've already fessed up to a couple of things which are very important and which we intend to fully highlight in oral argument.
Excellent. Bruce, anything else?
This case, to me, is the quintessential case to take. We could have taken a whole bunch of others over the years, and we just didn't. And most importantly, every FCC decision, every FCC proceeding is based on following the money. No matter what you do, whether it's special access or shutting off the copper wires. I'll give you an example. The shutting off of the copper wires. They say the copper wires are unprofitable. Oh, no, they're not. And they said that we've lost all these lines. Just so you know, when it comes down to the number of lines, they didn't count 80% of the lines. They hid them. So you're suddenly going, wait a second, what do you mean all these lines are still there? And, you know, so from my perspective, we've been working on this case. This started with me finding the financials in 2009 with a bunch of other people going, what do these things mean? We had no idea. So we've really taken a lot of time and a lot of effort with a team that I'm incredibly proud of. I mean, you know, these guys, I'm like the little kid in the candy store with these guys who actually know what the hell they're talking about. And my take is as a coordinated effort, if we prevail, all of the FCC proceedings and every state proceeding that was based on the FCC rules is now up for grabs. So in other words, they got rid of shutting off the copper. Well, maybe we should have to reopen that. They got rid of the fact that they couldn't do the rulers. Well, maybe they have to pay for it now. The financials that they're getting, the billions of dollars for 5G, maybe it has to go back to the states, and maybe that wire has to be for wiring the actual homes. All of these things, and low prices and more competition, and not a wireless world to the home, but a fiber optic world to the home. And I think this is, the stuff that we're excited about with working with you guys is we think that you guys, that there's a whole new gang of people that are actually active and care and want to do something about this. And so if we can coordinate the three-legged stool with you, that's what really is why we're doing this call. But this is why we're excited about the next steps.
Excellent. Well, I just want to say how excited I am about what you guys are doing. And this is the time that we need to collaborate and join forces on this. I was looking at your website, IRREGULATORS.org,
Right.
IRREGULATORS.org, and just under the team that you have assembled, it's not just you two. I mean, you have some very experienced high-level people who are stepping forward and part of your team that are willing and actually in this with you and have the courage to take on the big bad FCC, right? So to me, that's really encouraging on a couple levels. Number one, it gives you credibility. And number two, it shows me and it shows our audience, hopefully, that it isn't a hopeless situation. It isn't like the industry and everyone within the industry against the people. We're helping to dissolve that sort of us versus them. And we're saying, look, there's people who have been like yourselves in experience in an industry as pioneers, as leaders, as
we all have 30
stepped into onto the light side of this conversation and have the courage to do so. So thank you for that.
We all have 30 to 35 years experience each in the industry. We're all old guys. Yeah. And what happened was and most of some of them are retired and semi-retired, and I said, guys, this is the fight to do. Come back. This is sort of like, one of those movies that you can hear like in the boom, 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 and the guys get together and and we're like the last seventh samurai, where okay, it's time to do this fight because we have the data, we have we have the tools to do this. Come on, guys, let's do it. It took me a while to convince everybody.
Many of those samurai die at the end. I don't like that.
Yeah, no, the king's in the ending.
Well, we're old enough that we made it to this far so far.
Okay, so how timely do you need funds? And do I understand from one of your colleagues that is the amount that you need $90,000 to move the case forward and to be, get to the next phase? Or tell us about your needs, and let's just bring an openness to that part of the conversation, because many of the people watching this are going to be like, I want this thing to succeed. I understand that it needs money. How can I help?
Okay, I'll take that. We've been doing this on a shoestring, and we hired Scott as part of the team to and made sure that he did the work. So we really have not gotten the financials we wanted, and I'm not going to give any reasons why people did or did not help us raise money. We need about $200,000 to finish the case. We need about $100,000 to go back, stay solvent, and continue. And that's because the FCC does not pay legal fees. It does not pay expert fees. And so if this case goes forward and we're back to remands at the FCC or we go to the states, we have to spend money on actually building the next layer of cases too. This is going to be, and working with law firms and other groups to basically help pull this off. So we've sweat equity, but we've also, we put our blood, sweat, and tears into this one. And it was not what I expected, but I'm very proud that we did this because at the end of the day, I believe karma. This is meant to be because, we've done all this work. And if we didn't step up to the plate, none of this would have ever come out. So, it is a lot of sum of money, except for the fact that basically, there's a bunch of us working on this, and getting Scott to make sure that he's on the 17th and down doing what he has to do, and all that kind of stuff, and us going as a group, the regulators, to Congress, to these other agencies, and trying to get them to do antitrust cases, trying to do all these other investigations of the financials is a very, it's going to take a lot of work on our side, but it has to be done. We don't really have a choice.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate both of your sacrifices and that of those all on your team. So there's a link And I just want to say, like, many people watching us, or some people will be in the position where they can donate 10 or 20 or $50,000 perhaps. Like, let's get to this point where this can be properly funded. And so I'm putting my support behind this opportunity and this initiative of the Irregulators versus FCC. I'm saying that from my understanding and some of the legwork I've done, and from this conversation, and just, I'm so glad that we had this face to face, so that myself and our community can get a sense of you gentlemen and the work that you're doing on the front lines. You know, there's you mentioned, Scott, a three-legged, you know, stool, or like a three-pronged approach, and there's other things that are supporting, you know, other initiatives in addition to what you're doing. But I see what you guys are doing to be right in the crux of it, to really have a very, very strong opportunity. So if you're watching this, we're going to put a link. If you're watching on YouTube, look in the description for a link, click that link, and you can make a donation. And please consider a healthy, a generous contribution if you're in the position to do so. And if you're strapped, consider just a small symbol token of your support financially, because that is one of the, you know, the main aspects of what it takes to create change. Is we each have different roles. And so thank you for being part of this thing on whatever level as you're watching this. So and gentlemen, I just want to, you know, in closing, maybe ask you a personal question, if I could, because you know, the conversations within the summit and just my own personality, I'm always interested in things at a deeper level. Like, you're doing this work, you're on the front lines. I mean, you're probably, can you share a little bit about what that's like, and what kind of some of the sacrifices that you've made and are making, or are you able to sort of just, you know, keep marching ahead in this, and perhaps I might ask also, what inspires you the most in this battle?
Well, what inspires me the most, and is also the most painful thing, is I don't get invited to any of the FCC parties. In fact, I'm not much well liked in DC in general, simply because I tend to oppose what many of these agencies are doing, given who they are and the impact of what they do. So that's a good thing and sort of a bad thing.
Yeah, it's bittersweet.
I'm kind of the kind of guy that, you know, I wouldn't go to a party if they would let me in.
Thanks, Scott. Bruce, what about yourself? What can you share about this?
Scott is amazing. I'm sorry I have to say it, Scott. You know, the team that we put together is amazing. And the one thing that keeps me going is the fact that we've been working on this only 10 years, and we're now here. So all of the stuff in the background, I have another life, which I do music, but it keeps my sanity. And I'm also believe this is karma. This is a path that whether I chose it or I got stuck on, I feel like I got left holding the bag. In '92, when I saw that these guys were crooks and they were ripping off the cities, and I felt very bad. But the one story that people don't know about me is they ripped off my Aunt Ethel. So she's 87 years old, legally blind. I'm working for all the companies. I go to her house. She gives me her phone bills, and she's paying for all the shit that she didn't order. And I'm like, wait a second. And then she's paying $1,000 for a rotary phone because the deregulation just screwed her and screwed all the seniors. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And I go back to my clients. I say, excuse me, this can't possibly be happening. How could you rip off my Aunt Ethel? And they said, don't bite the hand that feeds you. And I was making a lot of money. I was traveling around the world. I was rich. I was famous. And so from my point of view, you know, I'm lucky that I can pay for the subway at this point. But that's not the issue here, because I believe in the long haul, this had to be done. I didn't have a real choice personally, because I had all these other people that are depending on it. And so I did. And so I did it for my Aunt Ethel. I did it for my friends. I did it for all of us who, because our gang is the only group that really knows this stuff well enough and could take the case. So, you know, wrangling Scott into suing the FCC was a big deal to me. Getting some of the other guys to show up and say, okay, I'm going to write a report about the accounting rules, one of the leading experts in the United States, and explaining it to me for years. That kind of stuff is invaluable. So I'm very zen. You know, I practice meditation. I'm very zen about the whole process. I used to, 15 years ago, get freaked out, but it's all, you have to have a job. You have to have something to do in life. And so this is my calling. This is to help, to working with this group. And this, I think, is like the culmination of all these years of work. And I'm really proud to be a regulator. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Scott, for the work that you're doing and for being part of this team in this conversation. May you be blessed and successful in January and beyond. And again, if you're watching this, thank you for your time and being part of this conversation. I encourage you to support this initiative, support the IRREGULATORS versus FCC lawsuit to the extent of your ability to do so. And gentlemen, I look forward to continuing this conversation. We're going to do either one of these calls, or we're going to collaborate on something. We're going to get some tools and some effective languaging into the hands of the people to bring to their elected reps.
So you're one of the reasons why I'm doing this, because people like you show up and you go, okay, I'm behind these guys.
Yeah.
That means a lot to us.
Well, it makes sense. It feels right. Like we have to do something. We know that everyone watching this knows that the whole part of this human experience, perhaps lesson right now, is that we have to be part of the solution. We can't wait back and blame the other side of the political spectrum, or blame a leader, or blame other people. This is really about participation. This is
right.
Community.
Well,
standing up for what we believe in, and not letting them get away with it.
Is you can't let them make you feel powerless. You are not powerless.
Exactly.
They want you to think that you are powerless, that there is nothing you can do. But you're not powerless. There are things you just need to be smart about what you do.
Very good. Yeah. Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk with you.
Thank you.
Getting folks in the local communities to start exhorting their state and local officials to educate themselves about what it is they can do.
Yeah.
There are many things they can still do. And all that these officials hear, though, is news coming down from the top and from the feds and from industry. There is nothing you can do. Your hands are tied. We have tied your hands. Well, your hands are not tied. I mean, there may be a piece of string around one of the fingers. Okay, there are many things that can be done. If I had an opportunity to speak to a local official about the local permitting process, for example, nobody's looking at the fiber permits for laying fiber that goes to them.
Yeah.
They may not be able to stop the tower, but they can stop the fiber that goes to the tower.
And can they not claim the infrastructure associated with their poles and their entire utility system? Like my understanding is they have police powers and they can claim ownership or control, at least. How does it?
Yes. The FCC has not preempted the ability of a state to tell somebody, no, you can't run fiber to that tower.
But at the local level, the local government.
Local level.
Okay. Yeah.
There are many things that could be done at the state and local level right now. I mean, if we win, there's going to be a whole bunch more things.
Yeah.
But right now, there are many things that could be done. And I would love, to be part of a team of experts that could go to state and local officials and say, these are the things that you can do. Pay no attention to your hands are tied. Yes, you have a finger that is tied, but you still got 9 other fingers.
We're writing a report on how our case fits in with what he knows, tied to the issues of all the cross-subsidies of wireless. Because nobody's really, in your side of the story, told our side of how it relates. So we're working that together, which to me is going to be very powerful, because we need the academics to understand what we're doing too, because nobody actually understands. I'm shocked that when you tell people, oh, there's a state utility, and you're talking to an expert, he goes, what do you mean? And so we had wanted to develop I will call it a municipality defense package, where it's legal, it's regulatory, it's what the assets are. But we suggested he go into the cities and find out where the fiber is, because he'd like that kind of stuff, and find out exactly where the wires is, and then say, okay, these wires we're taking back.
Yeah.
Scare the shit out of these people. And the other one is going after all the things like the cross-subsidies on the corporate operations expense, my favorite, because it's such a large amount that if we ever audited it, it would show all the people getting on the take. and that would scare everybody.
Wow.
Yeah, so think about it. It's the thing that's bothering me about the corporate operations. It's incredibly large, and it could be U.S.-wide for New York, which means they're dumping all the expenses into New York and the other cities, or it could be international. We don't know, and nobody's ever audited these numbers. And they're $1.5 billion in New York, just for local service. So I want to win. The one thing that I think most people don't understand is, okay, what does it take to win? If you look at the chessboard, what are the companies doing towards us, and what do we have to do to defend ourselves? Like ALEC takes a map of the United States and says, okay, which states are vulnerable and which states can we push through today to get a 5G bill in the next couple of weeks or months?
Yeah.
What would it take?
Timothy Sheckley talks a lot about ALEC and their bad laws.
We actually wrote the first article in 2007 for Harvard Neiman dealing with ALEC in Wisconsin. And they had put together a municipality bill, a shut off the copper bill. This is 2007. And nobody who knew who they were. We did a conference called Reverse ALEC, where we knew what to do. We just didn't have the budget to do it. So if you were asking me, ALEC is like a whack-a-mole. And if we don't take ALEC down and have a reciprocal thing that goes against ALEC in the states that they are in, then we can't win. But it's those kinds of things where doing a strategic plan on, okay, we really want to win. What is it going to take? And then raising money for that fight. Right now, what we have is, it's like, we're about to do D-Day, and we have like 4 guys over there on bicycles, and a couple guys with bazookas over here. Instead of like, okay, we're going to line everybody up and we're doing it all at once. Because if we want to win, most people don't want to go for the jugular. They don't. There's a lot of the nonprofits that are funded by the companies, and they're all compromised. So from my perspective for 5G, I view it as being totally scattered, small clusters of freedom fighters who are doing little battles here and there in certain cities. There's no real coordination of how to actually do model attacks and go after what's going after. And I think those are the kinds of things that to me are fascinating, because it's really like a game of chess where we are playing. We have like 4 pawns, and we have a couple guys with blindfolds, and they own the chessboard and they have all the pieces. So right now we have to fix that model if we want to win. Scott and I had conversations about this years ago, but we didn't know the budget, and most people are not educated. They don't know that there's a state utility, so they don't know that the wires are theirs, or they don't know that 5G is going to be is basically just a bait and switch, and they're only going to put it in certain places so they can say we got these cities. Now, if it was me, I'd go after Verizon as an SEC violation maybe, or something that says, excuse me, you announced all these cities, you're not in any of them. This is investor fraud or something like that. Pain in the ass cases that make every piece of this move. I'm not saying that's the right case, but things like that. Or they advertise that we're in these cities and they're not. Small things where you can move pieces of this, but it has to be, okay, we go after the advertising, we go after the funding, we go after the cross-subsidies. But all these things like for 5G, nobody has that real plan. That was one of the things that I thought getting everybody in a room together would be really, and creating a model for how do we get people like Scott, because he knows everything. Sorry, Scott. On how do you go out and deal with all the stuff. Scott could lay this out. Here's 20 cases we need to take. Boom, and say, okay, here's the template for them. Boom, and then we start getting partners to take them. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of. Sorry.
Let me just emphasize it. The other side is organized in just the fashion Bruce is talking about.
Yeah.
They have state and national groups and a whole bunch of shadow groups and a whole bunch of AstroTurf groups, and they've seeded money for years. They have a strategic plan, and that's what we're up against.
Right.
A bunch of people doing independent action, as well-intentioned as it may be, is destined to failure.
So we need to get organized, we need to get community connected, and we need to get going in the same direction with a strategic, action plan that includes legal strategy and grassroots strategy and communications and all of it.
We've got to give them an alternative. We can't just be against 5G.
Yeah, exactly.
And the alternative is, fiber to the home on an open, interoperable net neutrality network, preferably one that's community owned.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, the basis for a large, powerful, and effective strategy is there. I mean, the vision is seeded. It's just actually coming together and doing it. I think, Bruce, your idea of a bunch of leaders and just community people who care getting to a room and hashing it out is a great one. I'm not sure. What do you think the next steps on that? Obviously, there'd be some cost involved and so forth.
I pitched Camilla and Jim Turner to pull this off, and said, "Here's what we need," and Julian, and they were all, the three of them said, "Okay, that's what we should raise money for to do."
Actually,
and that was
physically come together in person. You're saying?
Yeah, DC, January. I don't care when. We're gonna be down there and watch Scott. We're gonna have pom poms, and I'm gonna bring some cheerleaders. Sorry, no, but you know what I'm saying. It's one of the things, or something like that. Where even if we have to Skype in and I have to go figure out how to use the camera. Still not used to seeing myself on the camera, but okay.
You're willing to do it, so thank you for that. But there is something to, as far as getting together in person, there is something powerful that happens when you get together in person, because you know that you're invested and you know that you're going to come away with, as a group, a strategy. You're doing this thing, right? So right. I tried after the summit, immediately after the summit, I tried to kind of get a bunch of people organized and get under the same umbrella and raise some funds, and it just kind of dissolved. And part of it was I needed a rest. I needed a break. I'm just starting to come back now. But
well, you did a good job. You did a great job on that.
I like the idea.
Yeah. But even if we did a small summit or pieces of it, where some of us were talking about just the legal and regulatory, or the economics, or that kind of stuff, we've laid out about 15, 20 cases that we thought were interesting along the way. And some of them we're looking at taking once we get the go-ahead from the FCC saying we're no longer involved. The FCC will never, ever say that outright. I don't believe that in the court they'll go, "Oh, no, the rules no longer apply." At which point, the guy's like, "Oh, thanks, we're done. Okay, great."